Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Love and Abuse. I am so glad that you are here. Let's get right into the topic. This is an email that I received recently. I'm just going to get right into it. Because of my commitment to mental health, wellness, and my deep understanding of it, I recognized how my significant other, who has been in AA and sober for a few years, was being hurtful. I spent days carefully writing a letter with compassion, detailing how I feel and the ways his behaviors hurt me. My hope was that he would see his hurtful behaviors and do something about them. Ideally, I fantasized that he would take my letter to a therapist and ask for help in unpacking and understanding it. He responded with an attack on me. He didn't address anything I had written, but chastised me for writing a letter that was, quote, all about me, and didn't consider his feelings. He said he has issues with me because I think I'm perfect, and he wants a flawed woman who is willing to admit mistakes. Help, please. Thank you for sharing that. Sorry you have to deal with this, and he's been sober for years, so that's fantastic, but he's still being hurtful, so there are still behaviors in him that need to be addressed from what you're telling me. Where I go with this. So here's the thing. I'm going to go right straight to the point. First of all, kudos for him for taking those steps. That's a very difficult step for a lot of people once you have an addiction. So I wanted to share that. Maybe he'll listen to this one day. Maybe somebody out there needs to hear that. But coming from addiction to taking the steps to stop that addiction is a huge step. It's a very courageous step. So again, kudos for that. Now, we have another issue. The other issue is his behaviors. I'm going to go straight to the point, like I said, and I'm going to give you his perception. This is me guessing what his perception would have been or was from your letter, from the message that you sent him. I don't know if you sent it in an email or wrote it down. I forget what you said. Oh, you spent days carefully writing a letter. So you probably handed him this letter, and let me tell you his perception, because I'm trying this on myself. And if this happened to me and I didn't expect it, let's just say he didn't expect it, what it would feel like is every missile launched at you at once. Everything, every problem that you have launched at him at once. So if you have 50 problems with him, and he gets it all in one letter, no matter how well it's written, all he's going to see are 50 problems, and he's just a big problem for you. I'm not giving him a break. He should not be hurting you. He should not be a hurtful person. He should work on that. Absolutely. But his perception is all those missiles were fired at him at once. And what does he do with that? The first thing he does is he goes right into defense mode. And he tries to make you feel bad, and he tries to put you down. He turns it around back on you, because how can he handle that? And I'm not putting you down. I'm not putting you down for making this letter. I think what you did was what needed to be done. You had to think about this stuff, and you wanted to share this stuff because you wanted him to change. And you wanted him to change because you care about him, and you want him to care about you. And you gave him an opportunity, a gift, really, of how to care for you. You gave him the gift, the knowledge of how to care for you. This is how you can care for me so I feel loved and loving toward you. This is how you can care about me so that I am attracted to you, so that I love you and want to be with you, so I can connect with you, so I can open my heart to you. I mean, from what you said, this doesn't sound like you said, well, you're this and you're that, and I can't stand when you do this, and you're being a big jerk when you do this. It sounds like you were very tactful and sympathetic, And you approach this very carefully and probably said it in a very kind way, but it was still 50 missiles at once. And so my thought on this is that you just gave him way too much to process at once. And everything you said to him is probably true. Everything you said to him is absolutely true in your mind. This is what you are feeling. This is what you're experiencing. And because it's true and it's said with kindness and probably respect, because you're doing your best to convey something to him without trying to make him sound like a bad guy, maybe. I don't know. I didn't see the message. But it sounds like you did your best to share what was happening, but you did it in one lump sum. This is everything you're doing to me. And that is very difficult for anyone to process. And again, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. I think you're doing the right thing. You have to share what someone is doing to you. You have to tell them, this is what is happening to me when you do this. I feel ashamed or embarrassed or guilty. And you are doing these things. And I feel this way when you do that thing. If you say this in front of our friends, I feel embarrassed when you do that. So would you please not do that? And this brings me to my main point, and the way I'm going to answer your message is that when you talk to someone, you want to address the specific behaviors and not put everything in a bucket and shower them with it. Don't dump it all over them. And that sounds so harsh. And I don't mean to be harsh, because I don't want you to pound your fist on your forehead saying, I'm so stupid. That's not it at all. That's not it. The real point here is that a lot of people don't know how to convey to the person they care about how they're hurting them. You don't know, or at least the right way to do it, quote, right way. You don't know the best way, the healthiest way. And so you tried the most passive, the most kindest and respectful way you could, and it was turned around on you and used against you, and he was trying to put you down so he could feel in control. He could feel like he wasn't losing his power, because this is what happens sometimes, is that people with addictive personalities, how do they stay in control? They use their addiction. They find something to stay in control. How do you regulate your emotions? You use your addiction. At least that's what addicts do. They regulate their emotions this way. So even sober, unless they've done maybe some extensive cognitive behavioral therapy or some sort of therapy or counseling to deal with the emotions, to deal with some old traumas and unresolved issues in their past, unless they've done that, then all they've done is learned how to work through their emotions in other ways, which is probably well taught in AA. I know it is. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff that I talk about in my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, is very similar to a lot of the teachings in AA. I didn't know that until somebody pointed it out, but boundaries and values and codependency and dysfunction, toxic behaviors, all that stuff I talk about on my other show. They talk about that in AA as well. So I believe they have a very good program. I don't know if I should know this, but I don't. I don't know if they talk about emotional triggers and how to deal with those triggers and how to regulate your emotions. I'm sure they do. And part of it is sharing your experiences with other addicts and such. It's sharing your experience. It's venting. It's relating to other people. And eventually not having the need for the drug or the alcohol or whatever vice it is, so that you can move on and try to live a somewhat decent life and not push people out of your life. So the addict has a lot to deal with and a lot to go through. And I know it sounds like I am totally siding with him, and it's not it at all. I'm actually just laying out the foundation of what the addict might have to go through. And I don't have personal experience in this, so I can't speak from that angle, but the addict does have a lot. I mean, this is my knowledge and my experience with the people I've worked with. The addict does have a lot to process and go through. And even when they're sober, they still have to figure out how to deal with their emotional stuff in other ways than using the addiction. And hopefully he has that, but it can be difficult when you are given a list of everything that you've done wrong, or you're doing wrong, or being hurtful. Even when it's sandwiched in between kind words and loving words, because we all know how this works. We all know that if somebody comes up to you and says, wow, you are such a nice person. You are so kind. You keep yourself well dressed. You show up. Your manners are wonderful. But man, you stink. I mean, that's just a terrible thing to hear. And, some people have to deal with that problem. But do you remember everything I just said that was nice? You might remember some of that. But if I said, man, you stink, that's the only thing you're going to focus on. It's the only thing you're going to remember. And I know most people listening now can relate to this. Yeah, that's what my partner, that's the person that emotionally abuses me. That's what they do. Sometimes they compliment me. They shower me with compliments, and then the next thing out of their mouth is hurtful. That can happen. Some relationships are like that. There's the up and down of love and abuse. It's hurtful and helpful, and hurtful and nice, and hurtful and kind. And there's all kinds of relationships that go up and down like that. But some of it is just extreme. Some of the behaviors in relationships are so extreme, hence the name of this podcast. So how do you deal with this now? That's the question, right? You've sent this message, and now he's turned it on you. And what he said was not nice. He said he has issues with you because he thinks that you're perfect, or he thinks that you think you're perfect. And he wants a flawed woman who is willing to admit mistakes. Well, it's not an unreasonable request in a healthy relationship, but it sounds like you may have had problems for many years, especially if you were with him when he was in full addiction mode. So that might have been really challenging then. But to address this, you said help, please. Yeah, how do you get from there where you are to where you want to be? So I think, it's tough because you've already laid everything on the line. He knows everything that you think about his behaviors now. And he needed to know this. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have known this, but I like to address behaviors one by one. Let's talk about this one thing first. One thing might be, you embarrass me in front of others. Not like his behavior, but you say something insulting to me in front of your friends, and it's embarrassing. It hurts my feelings. I wish you wouldn't do that. And if he said, I didn't even realize it, I'll stop doing that, and he stops, great. That's one behavior, one little step in the right direction. And if it stays that way, you're in good shape. My thought or my feeling is that it hasn't stayed that way, that you've conveyed these things before and he just won't stop. And so you decided to create this message in hopes that he would understand that, oh, now that I connect all the dots, I do all of these things, not just this one and this one and this one. I do all of these things. And maybe you're thinking that would give him the big picture, because some people don't get the small picture. Some people don't understand, oh, that's just one behavior. That's a normal thing that every relationship goes through. There's no problem with that, because that's a normal relationship thing when we know it's not normal, because emotional abuse works through the drip feeding of bad behavior and hurtful behavior time and time again. And so that drip feeding continues to wear away at the victim of that emotional abuse. It wears away at the victim. It wears away at the relationship. It wears away at the connection, and it closes the heart. And over time, eventually the heart will shut down. It'll seal itself. And when that happens, it's usually too late to repair, too late to go back to whatever it could have been, or too late to rebuild. Because usually once the heart is sealed shut, it doesn't reopen, at least to that person. It can reopen to other people in life in general, but to that person, it gets to the point where you need to protect yourself, so you seal your heart shut. And my hope is that we can address these things and fix what's going on in the relationship before the heart gets sealed. Because once the heart gets sealed, if the love's not there, it's not going to happen. If the love's not there, there's just no way out of it. I don't think I've ever seen someone seal their heart and then reopen it. Usually there's a tiny little crack in the door, and that's when there's a chance. That's what I tell people in the Healed Being program. If there's love, there's a chance. So if love is still in their heart and that door is cracked even just a sliver of the victim's heart, then there's a chance. But once that door is shut, it's over. So it's hard to tell where the victim of emotional abuse is inside because they're still processing a lot usually. But this is what can happen. So if someone is doing hurtful behavior to another person, that heart continues to close, and you just have to be aware of that. And I'm not talking to the person who wrote the message. I'm talking to her partner. The more behavior he does, the more your heart will close. And once it's closed for good, it's really difficult to get back. I'm not saying it's impossible. Yes, it is possible. But some major changes have to take place and some major rebuilding of trust and feelings of comfort and safety with the other person have to take place. Without that stuff, it usually doesn't happen. So coming back to this person's message, what's the next step? I think that would be your question. What's the next step? Well, it's difficult because I don't know the whole situation. I'm sure you've been being emotionally abused for a while now, so it's hard for me to say, go ahead and apologize because look at what you did to him, because look at all the years you've gone through with him. I can only assume that you've gone through a lot. But my approach to this is usually when there's been difficulty and one person won't change, the other person has to. If they want to resolve the problem and repair the relationship, or at least work on it, there has to be one person that takes a forward step in order for there to be a repair and a rebuild. So when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, you have to see it in that light. It's not that I would necessarily tell you this is what you need to do because I think you're responsible for all of this. This is not it at all. But I'm telling you this is what you need to do if you want to repair and heal, or at least start the healing process, if he's willing to do it with the relationship. So my comment to you is go to him and say, you're right. I'm not perfect. Look what I did. I just sent all these emotional missiles at you and expected you to make all these changes, and I didn't address them individually with you. I should have just shared one thing and told you this is something I'd like for us to work on because it hurts me when you do this, or it embarrasses me, or it makes me feel guilty. I shouldn't have sent you this message. It was wrong. Everything was on my mind. It all came out, and I should have done this differently. So I made a mistake. I tell you this, half of me wants to say, don't do that. Just say, too bad. You better stop hurting me. That's one half of me wanting to say that. You have a problem and you keep hurting me, and you got to stop hurting me. So you're the problem here. That's my best friend half to you. And my other half, the one that wants to coach you into a possible way to repair the relationship, is realizing that he's not going to budge, so you have to. And again, this is only if you want to work on and repair the relationship. So if you have to budge because he won't, then apologizing for what you did might show him that you are willing to be humble and vulnerable. And this is all for the greater good of the relationship, and to show him that you want to work on things. Even though the other half of me says, too bad, mister. You've got to work on this stuff or I'm leaving. Because that's what I really want to say. I really want to say that. But you might have a lot invested in this relationship and you don't want to leave. And maybe he's got so many great qualities. That's why you want to stay. So my approach is, if he's looking for a flawed woman, we're all flawed. He just doesn't want to feel alone in his flaws, because it doesn't sound like he's saying, I'm not flawed, I'm perfect. It sounds like he doesn't want to be alone in his flaws. Now, again, this is thin ice for me because I don't want to make it sound like you're the problem, because you're not. You've obviously had to deal with a lot to get to this point. But I like to find the most effective, the most productive way forward. And sometimes it means doing things that you don't necessarily want to do or believe you shouldn't have to do. But the half of me that says you should just say, too bad, take it or leave it, because if you don't change, I'm leaving, I can't just lead with that. I can't lead with that. I can only lead with the advice or suggestion that gives you the best chance at repairing the relationship, because it doesn't sound like to me that he wants to repair it or admit his faults, even though he might be saying he is or does have faults, because he wants you to have faults too. And again, let me just say it one more time. This is very difficult to assess because I don't have the entire story. I'm not a fly in the wall in your house. I don't know what he said, what you've said. And all I have is what you're speaking to me about in your message. And I can only assume that you have been a victim to many hurtful behaviors. So this is my approach, and this is why I'm approaching it this way. So the first thing I said was, okay, let's go to him and apologize. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have barraged you with this. I shouldn't have sent all those emotional missiles at once and made you feel attacked. I shouldn't have done that, and I'm sorry. You don't even have to say I'm a flawed person. You don't have to even fulfill that request of his, because just apologizing shows that you're a flawed person. I don't even like that term, flawed. It just shows that you're not perfect. How about that? You said that too. I'm perfect and he wants a flawed woman. You're not perfect. No one's perfect, but you just want to stop getting hurt. You want him to stop the behaviors. So sending him that letter may have been what pushed him over the edge, because he felt like he had no choice but to feel like he was being attacked, which I'm sure you've felt many, many times. But again, if we want to repair the relationship and we want to heal the relationship, one of you has to budge. And I'm talking to the person, which I believe has the ability to do that. Some people don't have that flexibility, don't want to do it. But let's just say that you do. Let's just say that you're going to take a step back and take a different approach. But we have to kind of fix this part first. So that's the first thing. I'm sorry I did that to you. I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. And, say it the way you would say it. But what this shows is that you're willing to give, you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to be humble, because the relationship and him are important to you. Now, after you say that, hopefully a dialogue can open up. Hopefully he will be more receptive, because now you are willing to admit a mistake that you made. At least in his eyes, you are admitting a mistake that you made. I'm not saying that you actually made a mistake. I'm just saying you could have approached this differently so it didn't turn into what it turned into. Apologizing shows vulnerability and a willingness to talk about things without him seeing you as righteous, without him thinking that you're perfect or whatever. It shows that you have flaws, which is what he wants to see. So the next thing will be, if you have a dialogue open, if he's willing to talk and willing to listen, you can say, there are things obviously that I want to address, because I do get hurt by some of your behaviors. I wouldn't say you always hurt me. I wouldn't say everything you do hurts me, because again, that's a barrage of missiles, emotional missiles. But you can say, for example, when you do this, it hurts. And then you share that. You address that one behavior. That hurts me. Will you please stop doing that? And hopefully he says, okay, I hear you now. I can hear you and I understand that, and I will stop doing that, or I will try. That's a bad answer. I will try, but it's a step. It's a small step in the right direction. And then if he actually violates his word and doesn't stop doing it, you mention it. You say, hey, look, you said you'd stop doing it, but here you are doing it again. And this is the kind of thing that builds up in me. This is the kind of thing that makes me feel like you don't care about me. You're not addressing all the other things he's done. You're not addressing it in a way that puts everything in a bucket and pours it over his head. You're addressing that one behavior. When you do this, it hurts. So you try to take care of these single behaviors. Now, the difficulty is identifying what's happening. This is what often can happen in any type of abusive relationship. You have to identify what's happening. And sometimes when you can't identify what's happening, like I feel strange, I feel like he just made me feel wrong or guilty, but I don't know how he did it. If that's the case, you have to go by your feelings. Your feeling is, wow, I feel really guilty right now, but I don't think I should, but for some reason I do. So now you can probably point out in your own mind when that started, or at least ask yourself, why do I feel guilty? What happened that made me feel that, or ashamed, or embarrassed, or hurt? What happened that made me feel that way? When did I feel that way? Exactly what point during our conversation did I start feeling like that? It's when he did this. It's when he said that. It's important to get to that point in your mind so that you can try to pinpoint what they're doing that is causing these feelings in you. You still may not know. You still may not understand when it happens or how it happens. But this is when you go to the point of just sharing. I don't know how, but what you just did hurt me. I don't know what you're doing, but what you just did hurt me. The person that hears that may say, well, that's not my problem. Or I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything that hurt you. That's your issue, not mine. They may say something like that. But you can say, well, what just happened? Because now I feel hurt. And you can have a conversation about it, I hope. Hopefully you can have a conversation about what just happened. Well, I feel hurt. I feel like I should feel guilty. Are you trying to make me feel guilty? That might be a question. Are you trying to make me feel guilty? Because if you are, it worked. Let's talk about that. The suggestions I'm giving you are usually found in a healthier relationship where you can actually communicate with the person that you're with. Most people that listen to this show can't communicate with the person they're with, at least in a way that is productive. But this is the way, or at least a major way to communicate, is just to pinpoint a behavior, pinpoint an emotion or a feeling that you're having, and bring those things up. Because if you put everything in the bucket, like I said, then it's very hard to process it all at the same time, especially for somebody who's had to go through a healing process of dealing with or trying to regulate their emotional state and all the thoughts in their head, because addictions usually, or a lot of the times, are ways to regulate an emotional state, and along with chemical dependencies and things like that. But usually when somebody has a temper or they can't handle things, they have no coping mechanisms or poor coping mechanisms, they might become addicted because that's how they regulate. And if they're using that as regulation and they don't have that anymore, then they have to have healthy coping mechanisms to deal with their emotions and their thoughts as challenges arise in their life. And so that can be another issue, another difficulty in a relationship, is that when you have somebody with poor coping mechanisms because they used to regulate it in one way, but now they don't do that anymore, they need alternatives to deal with challenges. They need emotional intelligence. They need to know how to regulate their emotions and get through the tougher times in life. So the best answer I can give you is offering what I believe to be his perspective. His perspective is that he felt like everything was coming at him at once, and that's why he flew off the handle and attacked you. I'm not excusing this at all, but helping you understand the perspective. If you want to grow and change the relationship and heal it, or try to heal it together, hopefully, then what needs to happen is one of you needs to move in a direction that might be uncomfortable for you. And I prefer the victim of emotional abuse to say, hey, look, you need to change or else. I prefer that. That's my best friend part coming out, saying, I prefer you to do that. The behavior and relationship coach in me, however, says, if you want to work on this relationship and you want it to grow and you want to stay in this relationship, then one of you has to budge. And since he's not going to budge, you have to be the one to budge, which means you might have to make some compromises. And one of those compromises might be taking a step back, approaching this differently, and even apologizing when you don't feel like you need to, approaching it in a way that shows that you are willing to give, you are willing to take a step back, you are willing to show that yes, you have flaws and maybe you do have things to work on as well, because it's hard for someone else to change if they're with someone who doesn't believe they're perfect. And usually I say that to the victim of emotional abuse who's with someone who thinks they're perfect. And what usually doesn't happen is the victim of emotional abuse telling me that their partner said that they believe that the victim believes they're perfect. I mean, it does happen. It's rare. So for this to come out, it gives you an opportunity to work on something specific. Because if he wants a flawed person, great. We can fulfill that easily. That's an easy request because we're all flawed. We're all imperfect. That's easy to fulfill. So I've given you maybe a controversial approach here. I think some people are listening right now saying, why would you give that advice? Why would you tell her to back off when he's the emotionally abusive one, when he is the problem? I agree that, there are people that absolutely need to get accountability and say, look, if you don't stop doing all these things, I'm leaving. I even teach that in other areas, the programs that I run and stuff like that. But there are specific circumstances that I believe can have a chance of working out if one person budges. And I really prefer for the emotionally abusive person to budge, but they're usually the last to budge. So if you want to see if this can work, sometimes you have to be the person that budges just to find out if it will work, just to find out if there is a chance. Because if you budge, and what I mean by that is if you do say, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Let's just say that's your budging. And I should have only addressed one thing at a time. And next time I'll do that, I'm so sorry. When you budge like that, when you compromise a little bit and say, this is what I'll do, I'm so sorry, it gives him an opportunity to change. Instead of being on the defense, he will now see that you're backing off, and hopefully he will open up and say, well, thank you for that. That's what I want. Hopefully he'll say that. I hope he does. But if he doesn't, and he doesn't change, then that might be what you have. That might be all he is. That might be all he can do. That might be all he will give. And when you are with somebody that will not give, will not budge, will not work with you, doesn't really care about working on the relationship and just tells you to do it, then you're probably not with an equal. You're probably not with somebody who really wants to work on things and will be humble and vulnerable too and take responsibility for their role in what's going on in the relationship, which means you pretty much have to look at it as that will never change. Nothing will change if they won't change or they won't budge. And sometimes in order to get them to budge, you have to budge first. I think that's the best way to put it without telling you you're wrong, without calling you the problem, because you're not. You've been through a lot. You've been through enough. But I'm also going to give it to you straight on this show and tell you the best way to approach things. And sometimes we take a step that causes a big issue in the relationship, and we could have done it differently. You didn't do it wrong, but you could have done it differently. And let me just say this, even if you did it differently, it could have still worked out the exact same way, making everything I said in this episode completely pointless. I'm sorry, but that's sometimes how it works. Sometimes You do budge. Sometimes you do compromise. Sometimes you approach a single behavior and you deal with a single behavior and you're still attacked. You're still put down. You're still wrong in their eyes, and you can't do anything right, again, in their eyes. And when that comes into play, when you're in that kind of situation, there's not much you can do because they're not willing to give a little bit, be vulnerable, be humble, and work on things together. Stay strong. I know this is difficult. You have gone through a lot. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing that with me, and share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook gives you your mean score, which tells you the exact behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Now you can pinpoint the specific, unhealthy, and even toxic behaviors in your relationship to help you take the next best steps for you and those you care about. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. And if you discovered that you are doing hurtful behaviors to someone that you care about and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. The course comes with a private online group where I and others will give you direct support. You'd be amazed how good you feel when you're able to stop making those you love feel bad. That's healedbeing.com. And if you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant because you are. We'll talk again soon.